The helicopter groaned against the roar of the storm, its rotors slicing through the thick clouds like knives. Rain pelted the metal skin of the chopper, turning the interior into a slick, cold cage. Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds gripped the straps of her harness, knuckles white. Every muscle in her body was coiled, alert. She'd flown into combat zones before, faced ambushes, and walked through hell, but something about this mission felt off. The radio crackled with nervous voices, their words barely audible over the howl of wind. "Enemy fire ahead," muttered one of the younger rangers, his tone tight with fear. Amanda didn't flinch. Years of training had taught her that fear was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford. She scanned the horizon through the rain-streaked windshield. The mountain peaks of the Afghan border rose like jagged teeth, cloaked in black storm clouds. Somewhere in those heights lay their extraction point, a small village, where they were supposed to pick up a high-value informant. Simple, clean, quick. That was the plan. Plans never survive first contact. The helicopter lurched violently as a flash of light streaked past the side window. RPG fire. The pilot cursed under his breath, battling the controls as tracer rounds ricocheted off the fuselage. Metal groaned. Amanda felt the chopper tilt sharply, the harness digging into her shoulders. Her training screamed at her to stay calm, to locate exits, to prepare for sudden impact. Then came the explosion. It was deafening, a blast that seemed to split the world in two. The helicopter shook violently as fire ripped through the tail rotor. Amanda's stomach dropped. She grabbed the straps of her harness, but before she could stabilize herself, a violent jolt hurled her across the cabin. The side door, mangled by shrapnel, swung open, and the wind pulled at her like a giant hand. She was falling. Time slowed. Rain struck her face like tiny knives. The roar of the storm was deafening, yet in the middle of it all, Amanda felt an eerie calm. She was alive. Her instincts kicked in, honed from countless jumps and survival exercises. She twisted in mid-air, angling herself toward a rocky slope below. Behind her, the helicopter screamed on, a metal beast fighting to survive the storm. Her teammates' shouts were carried away by the wind. "Amanda!" Someone yelled, a voice filled with horror. But the distance swallowed it. The mountains rushed up to meet her. She clenched her jaw and braced for impact. The jagged rocks below promised death. Yet Amanda's mind raced through every survival protocol she had learned. Tuck, roll, protect the head, use the body to absorb impact. The first strike was brutal. Pain exploded through her ribs, stealing her breath. She slid across rocks, the wind whipping her hair into her face. Cuts opened along her arms, blood mingling with the rain, stinging like fire. But she didn't scream. Pain was irrelevant. Survival was everything. She came to a stop in a narrow ravine, hidden by shadow and rain. Her body ached, broken in places, but she was alive. The roar of the storm masked the distant gunfire and the fading whines of the helicopter. Amanda lay there for a moment, listening, assessing, reminding herself she wasn't done. She couldn't be. Somewhere above, her unit assumed the worst. The captain's voice crackled in the comms, directing the remaining rangers to continue the mission, their hearts heavy with the weight of presumed loss. Amanda knew they would think she was dead. Command would list her as Pia, but she was still breathing, still thinking, still fighting. Rising slowly, she felt the blood on her hands and face. Her armor was dented, straps torn, but her weapons were mostly intact. She tugged her radio free from the wreckage, tried the frequency. Static. Dead. Not unexpected. Communications rarely survived impacts like that. She cursed under her breath, the words lost in the storm, then focused on what mattered, the terrain, the enemy, the team she had sworn to protect. The ravine she now occupied was narrow and steep, filled with jagged rocks and mud. Each step required calculation. One false move, one slip, and she could easily tumble into the gorge below. Her ribs screamed with pain, but Amanda leaned on her ranger training. She moved with precision, testing every foothold, scanning for enemy patrols. And then she saw them. Signs of life, footprints in the mud, makeshift camp remnants. Enemy soldiers were searching the mountain. They hadn't seen her yet, but she knew they would. In her mind, she ran through the survival checklist: concealment, movement, finding water, tending wounds. Each task was a battle against exhaustion, pain, and fear. Her body was battered, but her mind was razor-sharp. Each breath, each movement, each heartbeat was a defiance against death. Amanda whispered the Ranger creed under her breath. "I will never leave a fallen comrade. I will never quit." That mantra became her shield against despair. As night fell, the storm abated slightly, leaving a cold mist over the valley. Amanda found a shallow cave to take shelter. She stripped mud from her cuts, bandaged her wounds as best she could, and set a small fire using the remnants of supplies from the helicopter. The warmth was minimal, but it was enough to remind her she was alive. Hunger, thirst, and fatigue pressed in, but Amanda's spirit remained unbroken. She thought of her team, trapped above, unaware she had survived. They would assume she was gone, but she had a plan. Survival was only the first step. Rescue, regroup, and complete the mission. That was the promise she made silently to herself. Hours passed. The storm finally broke, revealing a moonlit canyon. Amanda peered out, surveying her surroundings. The mountains were cruel, unforgiving, yet beautiful in their harshness. She knew every crevice, every shadow could harbor danger, but she also knew that danger was something she had trained to meet head-on. She flexed her fingers, tested her wounds, and whispered to the silent night, "You're not taking me today." Somewhere in the valley, the faint sound of distant artillery echoed, a reminder that this was only the beginning. Amanda Reynolds, battered but unbroken, rose to her feet. Every step forward would be a fight, every breath a victory. And somewhere, in the storm-swept heights of Thunder Ridge, a ranger who had been thrown from a helicopter refused to die. Because rangers don't fall. They survive. Months before the fall of Thunder Ridge, Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds had walked into Ranger School with nothing but determination and a sense of purpose. Tall, lean, and unassuming, she carried herself with quiet confidence, but others doubted her almost immediately. The men she trained alongside were seasoned, physically imposing, and skeptical. Many questioned whether a woman could endure the brutal regimen of Ranger School. Whispers followed her like shadows through the mud and gravel. She won't make it. Amanda ignored them. Her focus was absolute. Every day began before dawn, with cold rain soaking through her uniform and wind whipping against her skin. Every obstacle was a test of endurance, scaling walls, crawling through barbed wire, crossing freezing rivers, carrying heavy packs across rugged terrain. Each physical task was paired with mental challenges designed to break recruits. Sleep deprivation, hunger, confusion, and constant pressure were weapons intended to identify the weak. She faced humiliation daily. During a 20-mile ruck march through ankle-deep mud, one of the male recruits shoved her, joking that she'd never finish. Amanda didn't respond with anger. She focused on her steps, on steady breathing, on every muscle. When she crossed the finish line hours later, exhausted, shivering, and soaked to the bone, she didn't celebrate. She moved immediately to help another recruit struggling with cramps. Discipline and endurance weren't just personal traits, they were tools of leadership. Marksmanship became Amanda's sanctuary. While others struggled to maintain focus after grueling exercises, she steadied her breathing, ignored the storm or sun, and made every shot count. During one field exercise simulating enemy engagement, she noticed a hidden sniper 2 clicks ahead. Without hesitation, she calculated trajectory, distance, and wind drift, then fired. The target went down silently. Her instructors were stunned. The other recruits stared, mouths agape. That's when she earned her call sign, Hawk. But skill alone wasn't enough. Amanda had to navigate constant skepticism and subtle sabotage. One morning, her pack was swapped with an empty one during inspection, her water ration stolen, her boots swapped for ones a size too small. Each minor setback tested her resilience. She laughed quietly at the absurdity, fixed what she could, and continued. These moments became lessons. Her focus had to remain unshakable, her mind sharper than anyone's, her instincts precise. Leadership was another battlefield. During squad exercises, she learned the delicate art of command under fire. Many tried to dismiss her, but she remained assertive without arrogance, decisive without recklessness. When a team member panicked during a river crossing exercise, Amanda grabbed his arm, steadied him, and directed him safely to the shore. In moments like this, respect grew, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it through action. Sleep deprivation became her teacher in mental endurance. Nights spent shivering in the mud, listening to distant howls of coyotes and the rustle of leaves, taught her how to remain calm in chaos. Hunger taught her creativity, making edible meals from meager rations, rationing water without hesitation. Pain taught her discipline. Every step, every push, every obstacle was an opportunity to train not just her body, but her mind to function when most would collapse. By the end of the second month, Amanda was no longer just surviving. She was excelling. During a final field exercise simulating enemy ambush, she led her squad through a dense forest at night, navigating without maps, without radio contact, evading patrols, and completing objectives ahead of schedule. When she returned, soaked, bleeding from minor scrapes, and exhausted beyond comprehension, her instructor shook his head in disbelief. "Reynolds doesn't quit," he said simply. "She recalculates." That's what makes her lethal. That lethality was not just physical. Amanda's intelligence, intuition, and decisiveness set her apart. In survival exercises where recruits had to find water in a desert canyon, she spotted a natural spring hidden beneath rocks, while others stumbled blindly for hours. During navigation drills in dense forests, she anticipated enemy routes and led her team safely through ambush zones. Every exercise honed her instincts, sharpened her judgment, and proved that survival was not about luck. It was about preparation, observation, and unyielding will. And yet, despite her success, Amanda never let pride take root. She helped struggling recruits carry packs, shared her rations when someone had none, and stayed alert to their safety, even during the most grueling exercises. She understood the Ranger creed. The mission mattered, but so did the lives of those who lead. This duality, lethal precision tempered by responsibility, became the hallmark of her character. One night, during a survival exercise deep in the mountains, she huddled in a shallow cave with a few remaining teammates. The temperature dropped to near freezing, and the wind howled like a living thing through the rocks. One of the male recruits shivered uncontrollably, muttering that he couldn't go on. Amanda placed her hand on his shoulder. "You can," she said quietly. "The body wants to quit. The mind decides, focus, just take the next step." That night, several recruits slept beside her, no longer seeing her as a challenge to their ego, but as a lifeline. Weeks later, during the final parachute jump exercise, Amanda's squad struggled with the cold and altitude. Some landed off target, injured by sharp rocks or tangled lines. Amanda descended flawlessly, timing her release perfectly, controlling her landing and rolling to absorb the shock. When she touched the ground, her team cheered, and some silently began to respect her, not just as a capable soldier, but as someone extraordinary. By graduation, Amanda Hawk Reynolds had endured the full spectrum of Ranger training: exhaustion, injury, ridicule, sabotage, hunger, and fear, and emerged stronger. Every bruise, every blister, every sleepless night had forged her into a soldier capable of surviving what others could not. She was lean, agile, and precise, with a mind as sharp as her marksmanship and a resolve that no storm, no injury, and no enemy could shake. The instructors remembered her not as the woman who completed Ranger School, though that was remarkable, but as the soldier who redefined expectations, who showed that fear could be mastered, and that resilience, training, and instinct could bend even death to one's will. It was this training that would allow her to survive the impossible fall from Thunder Ridge months later. Amanda often recalled a line from her instructor, repeated during the final days of training: "Rangers don't quit. They adapt. They survive. And when the impossible happens, they rise." Those words became a lifeline in the canyon below the storm-torn helicopter. Every pain, every cut, every step she had endured in Ranger School prepared her for this moment. She was no longer just a soldier. She was a force of nature, a survivor forged in fire. And though the storm howled around her, Amanda Reynolds, the Hawk, silently promised herself she would survive, she would fight, and she would return. The mountains had thrown her into chaos, but they had underestimated the woman who had learned to endure, to lead, and to rise from every fall. The morning of the mission began like any other. Crisp air, gray skies, and the tension of knowing the unknown lay ahead. Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds checked her gear meticulously, as she always did. Every strap, buckle, and magazine counted. Her team moved with quiet efficiency, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy on everyone. Intelligence had confirmed a high-value Taliban informant was ready for extraction in a remote village on the Afghan-Pakistan border. This mission would be quick, a clean in-and-out operation, or so they hoped. They had rehearsed every scenario. Every possible enemy engagement had been simulated during long nights at Fort Benning. But no simulation could replicate the uncertainty of the mountains, the improvisation of enemies who had lived there for decades, or the subtle betrayals of those who moved among them unseen. Amanda had learned to trust her instincts. Today, her gut screamed unease. The helicopter approached the landing zone cautiously, cutting through thick clouds. The storm from previous days had receded, leaving a brittle, cold wind in its place. The pilot's eyes were sharp, scanning the treacherous peaks for threats. Amanda and the Rangers prepared for a fast descent. Harnesses secured, rifles loaded, every muscle tense. They were professionals, yet the mountains were unforgiving. One misstep could mean death. As the chopper hovered above the extraction point, a ripple of unease passed through Amanda. Something felt wrong. She scanned her harness and equipment, confirming every connection. Her instincts tightened. Soldiers trained to trust their gut. Often it is the first warning of danger. Then she noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible looseness in her harness. She tugged at it subtly, adjusting, but the metal clip felt strange. Someone had tampered with it. Her mind raced. She considered every possibility: accident, poor maintenance, sabotage. Who would have access? Who could do this? In the adrenaline-charged atmosphere, she didn't have time to investigate, only to prepare. Touchdown in 2. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. The helicopter lurched violently, and before Amanda could react, the first explosion hit. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward them, striking the tail rotor. Metal screamed under the pressure. The birds shuddered violently. The wind roared in their ears. The harness, already compromised, gave way. Amanda plummeted. The world spun around her in a blur of rain clouds and jagged rock faces. The helicopter screamed above, smoke trailing from the damaged rotor, while her teammates shouted her name, voices carried away by the storm. She remembered every survival technique drilled into her. Tuck, roll, protect vital points, assess injuries immediately upon impact. The fall was brutal. She struck rocks, her ribs absorbing the shock, blood mingling with rain. Pain surged in waves, sharp and relentless, but Amanda forced herself to breathe, to move, to survive. Minutes stretched like hours as she assessed her situation. No radio, no immediate shelter, and potential enemy forces nearby. She had fallen from the helicopter, but she was alive. Above, the remaining Rangers fought to regain control of the helicopter, unaware of her survival. They were trained to assume the worst, but none had expected the impossible, that she would endure the fall and live. Command radios buzzed with confusion, reporting casualties and organizing secondary extractions. Amanda's name was already whispered with grief. Sergeant Reynolds, KIA. Meanwhile, the insurgents were aware of the crash. They had anticipated their arrival, likely tipped off by leaks within the local network. Amanda's mind ran through the possibilities. Enemy ambush, betrayal, mechanical failure. One reality pressed painfully on her. Someone aboard the helicopter may have intended her fall. A calculated push, a loose harness, a misdirected command. The thought burned her anger, sharpened her focus. As she lay among jagged rocks, bleeding, bruised, and exhausted, Amanda began to move. Pain was irrelevant. Only survival mattered. Her ranger training took over, instinct guiding every decision. She avoided open ground, hugged shadows, and observed distant patrols. Every movement was deliberate, precise. She knew enemy forces were methodical. She had to be faster, smarter, quieter. She scavenged what she could from the wreckage. Supplies were minimal. A half-damaged canteen, a single first aid kit, and her sidearm, slightly dented but functional. Her backpack had been partially destroyed during the fall. Amanda scavenged scraps of cloth, ripped portions of the parachute or torn netting from the chopper to bandage wounds. Each action was a victory against despair. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rugged valley. Amanda found herself in a small alcove, a natural cave that offered minimal shelter from the cold mountain air. She rested briefly, tending to deep cuts along her arms and side. Every breath hurt. Every movement was agony. But she reminded herself of the code she lived by. Rangers do not quit. Rangers survive. And she would, no matter the cost. As night fell, she thought of her team. They were likely moving along their planned exfiltration route, unaware of her presence. They might assume she had been lost, or worse. Amanda's pulse quickened with resolve. Survival was the first step. Rescue was the next. The mission must continue. The informant still awaited extraction, and her comrades' lives were at stake. The thought of betrayal gnawed at her. Who had sabotaged the harness? Was it an enemy agent within their intelligence network? Or a rogue operative? Amanda didn't allow speculation to paralyze her. Instead, she cataloged the details in her mind, making note of everything. Each clue might prove essential later, not just for survival, but for justice. Hours blurred into night. Amanda remained vigilant, listening for enemy movement, evaluating potential escape routes. She rationed the little water she had, crafted a crude sling to stabilize her fractured arm, and rested briefly. Sleep was impossible. Vulnerability was death. She whispered the Ranger Creed under her breath, a mantra to keep the fire alive. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. By midnight, she had moved silently to higher ground, observing enemy positions. The patrols were methodical but slow, unaware of the shadow in the canyon. Amanda's mind raced, not with fear, but with strategy. Every branch, every rock, every shadow became a tool in her arsenal. She would move when they were least attentive. She would survive. She would fight. Somewhere deep in the valley, fragments of the helicopter wreckage smoldered, a faint reminder of the chaos that had begun the mission. Amanda looked down at the twisted metal, at the world that had nearly claimed her, and felt a spark of defiance. They had thrown her from the helicopter, but they had underestimated the resolve of a ranger forged in fire. Tomorrow, she thought, she would move closer to the team. Tomorrow, she would reclaim her mission. But tonight, she would survive. Every wound, every pain, every whispered mantra reinforced her will. Amanda Hawk Reynolds, thrown from the sky, battered but unbroken, had become the impossible survivor, a ghost in the valley, ready to rise. The storm had finally passed, leaving a brittle dawn light filtering through jagged peaks. Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds emerged from the cave she had found the night before. Every muscle screamed in protest, her ribs still bruised from the fall, her arm bound in a crude sling fashioned from torn parachute fabric and duct tape. Blood had dried into streaks along her uniform, and her boots were caked in mud and grit. Yet she moved. Pain was a detail. Survival was the mission. The valley stretched out before her, cruel and jagged, nicknamed by locals as the Valley of Bones for the scattered remains of unfortunate travelers and fallen combatants alike. The landscape was both enemy and ally. Steep cliffs could conceal her movements, but one misstep could send her tumbling to death. Amanda measured each step, testing every foothold, calculating angles of ascent and descent. The rangers had trained her for this. Movement through dangerous terrain, silent and deliberate. Every action a statement of intent. Her first priority was water. The half-full canteen from the helicopter would not last long. She spotted a thin stream running along a ravine, brown from storm runoff but drinkable with proper filtration. Using a strip of her torn uniform as a makeshift filter, she sipped cautiously, savoring the liquid as if it were nectar. Hunger pressed in too, but food could wait. Survival demanded focus and energy, and she had to keep both. Amanda moved cautiously, keeping low and scanning constantly. She had no radio, no way to contact her team, and every shadow could conceal the enemy. She relied entirely on her training. Years of observation exercises, reconnaissance drills, and navigation through hostile terrain coalesced into instinctual movement. She calculated enemy patrol patterns based on tracks in the mud, the disturbed placement of stones, and the faint echo of voices carried through the valley. It wasn't long before she saw signs of the insurgents. Footprints leading to temporary encampments, remnants of burned supplies, and the occasional discarded shell casing. They were methodical, systematic, unaware of the phantom moving silently above their positions. Amanda adjusted her path, crawling through mud and brush, staying downwind to avoid detection. The Valley of Bones was silent but deadly. Every creak of rock or snap of a twig could reveal her presence. Night fell quickly in the mountains. Amanda found a shallow alcove in the rock face to rest. Using shards of metal and stone, she reinforced a small barrier, creating a crude shelter. She cleaned her wounds as best she could, using the limited supplies from the helicopter, antiseptic wipes, cloth, and sheer willpower. Her body screamed in protest, hunger, exhaustion, and pain, but she ignored it. She had survived worse in training, and this was no different in principle, only in scale. Sleep was impossible. Her mind refused to quiet. Every sound made her flinch, Every shadow sparked tension. She whispered the ranger creed under her breath. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I will never quit. It wasn't mere ritual. It was survival strategy. Her team might be trapped nearby, her mission incomplete, and she could not afford to fail. Over the next days, Amanda learned to live like a ghost. She crafted simple traps to catch small wildlife, fashioned crude bandages from torn fabric, and collected rainwater in scraps of metal debris. She navigated the valley silently, avoiding enemy patrols and carefully moving only when the wind masked her movements. Every day was a battle against the elements, against injury, and against isolation. She kept mental logs of potential enemy positions, noting patterns and weaknesses in their patrols. The loneliness was crushing. At night, she spoke to herself, rehearsing strategies, running drills in her mind, imagining extraction scenarios, and planning paths through the mountains. Memories of ranger school came vividly, the nights spent in the mud, the cold river crossings, the moments when survival seemed impossible, but discipline prevailed. These memories were not just nostalgia. They were her survival tools. One evening, she stumbled upon a small supply cache left by villagers: grains, dried meat, and some water. Her pulse quickened with relief. Every morsel mattered. She rationed meticulously, consuming only what was necessary to maintain strength. The enemy was near, and she could not risk overindulgence or exposure. Each bite, each sip, each movement was a strategic choice. Amanda knew that staying put too long was dangerous. The insurgents were methodical and would eventually search the valley thoroughly. She mapped the terrain mentally, identifying natural corridors, hidden ledges, and potential ambush points. She moved primarily at dawn and dusk, when shadows and low light worked in her favor. Her body ached with fatigue, her wounds a constant reminder of the fall, yet she adapted. She had trained for this, and she had survived worse. On the seventh day, she finally spotted smoke in the distance, a small, controlled fire. Her heart raced. Could it be her team? Enemy forces? She observed from a high ridge, noting the movement around the fire. Insurgents, heavily armed, were securing a captured village. Amanda's mind worked quickly. Her team could be held somewhere nearby, hidden from view. She could not ignore them. Her mission was no longer just survival. It was rescue. Her path was perilous. The valley narrowed ahead, cliffs rising on both sides. Amanda paused, calculating the safest descent route. Every rock, every ledge, every gust of wind became a variable in her survival calculus. She moved slowly, carefully, testing each foothold before committing her weight. Pain radiated through her ribs and legs, but she refused to slow. Failure was not an option. As night fell again, Amanda reached a narrow ridge overlooking a patrol route. Enemy soldiers moved in a pattern she had predicted days ago. She crouched low, blending into the shadows, and observed. Her tactical mind, sharpened by years of ranger training and weeks of survival in the valley, identified the precise moment to move. One misstep could mean death, yet hesitation could also be fatal. She exhaled slowly, steadying her breath, and began to descend. Every movement was silent, deliberate. Her shadow merged with the rocks, the sound of her breathing muffled by the wind. Below, the patrol passed, unaware of the hunter above. Amanda's resolve strengthened. She was alone, wounded, and outnumbered, yet she was still in control. The Valley of Bones was treacherous, but she had become part of it, a silent, invisible force capable of surviving what others could not. By dawn, Amanda reached the lower ravine. Her muscles ached, her body was battered, and her supplies were minimal, but her spirit burned bright. The village in the distance offered hope, for shelter, for intelligence, for a chance to regroup. Yet she knew she could not rush blindly. Every step, every decision could mean life or death. She paused, taking in the valley that had tried to claim her, and whispered to herself, "You don't know who you're dealing with. I survive." And so, alone, hunted and injured, Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds pressed forward. The Valley of Bones had tried to break her. The mountains had tried to bury her. But she was trained, disciplined, and determined. She was no ordinary soldier. She was a ranger. And rangers, she reminded herself, do not simply survive, they overcome. By the 5th day in the Valley of Bones, Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds had become something the mountains and enemy alike could not define: a ghost. Her movements were silent, deliberate, and lethal. Each day she adapted further to the unforgiving terrain, using her ranger training not just to survive, but to dominate her environment. She no longer walked. She flowed with the shadows, blending with rocks, scrub, and the occasional flicker of moonlight reflecting off a canyon wall. The enemy patrols were methodical, systematic, and deadly, yet Amanda anticipated their every move. Every footprint, every snapped twig, every discarded weapon became part of a mental map of the battlefield. She studied patterns, calculated shifts in behavior, and predicted movements hours before they occurred. Her mind worked tirelessly, combining tactical expertise with survival instinct, ensuring that she remained unseen and untouchable. Food and water were scarce. Amanda hunted small animals with traps fashioned from remnants of her uniform and the wreckage of the helicopter. She collected rainwater and melted snow trickling from cliff faces, rationing it with precision. Each meal, each sip, each movement was part of a delicate balance, staying alive while remaining undetected. Hunger gnawed at her, but discipline controlled desire. Weakness was not an option. The locals began to notice her presence, though not fully understanding it. Villagers whispered of a shadow moving across the cliffs, a figure that struck quickly and disappeared. Rumors spread among both villagers and enemy scouts. A ghost soldier, patrolling the mountains, stealing supplies, and vanishing without a trace. Amanda's legend began before she even realized it. To the enemy, she was a phantom. To her, she was simply doing what rangers were trained to do: survive and protect. One night, as she crept along the ridge of a canyon, Amanda observed a small insurgent outpost. Their supply lines were poorly guarded, but the risk of detection was high. She calculated the trajectory and timing of a small ambush, intending to disable their communications and divert attention from her main objective, locating her team. Silently, she moved into position. A stone rolled under her boot, clattering against the rocks. The guards froze, scanning. Amanda froze as well, heart pounding, and then melted back into shadow. They dismissed it. The ghost was clever, patient, untouchable. Her mind wandered to her team, trapped somewhere in the mountains. Intelligence had been incomplete before the crash, but through careful observation and deduction, she began piecing together their likely location. Enemy chatter, intercepted signals, and her own mental maps indicated that her unit had been corralled into a narrow valley several miles east. Her pulse quickened. Rescue was no longer theoretical. It was necessary. She could not fail. Every step closer to the enemy strengthened her determination, but also increased the danger. Amanda moved like a predator, silently stalking her own territory within the valley. She sabotaged small supply caches, destroyed communications, and created diversions to mislead the enemy about her location. Each act was measured, calculated, and executed with surgical precision. Her reputation among the insurgents grew. They whispered of the specter, a phantom moving at will, striking without warning. Amanda's resourcefulness extended beyond combat. She found small caves to rest in, collected dry firewood to stay warm, and created makeshift bandages for injuries that had not yet healed from her fall. The pain was constant, but irrelevant. Hunger and exhaustion pressed on her, but discipline and training pushed her forward. She visualized the terrain constantly, creating mental maps, escape routes, and ambush strategies. One night, she encountered a patrol, unaware of her presence. They were lightly armed, but numerous. Amanda observed from a high vantage point, calculating the perfect moment to strike. Using shadows and the terrain, she disabled one guard silently, then disappeared into the rocks before the others could react. This careful combination of observation, patience, and execution epitomized the ranger training that had prepared her for this moment. As Amanda moved deeper into the valley, she noticed signs that her team had been forced to halt: makeshift shelters, footprints, and remnants of equipment. The evidence confirmed what she had feared. They were trapped. The enemy had underestimated her presence, and she now held a strategic advantage. She planned her approach carefully, mapping the terrain, noting patrol rotations, and assessing enemy strength. Every decision was precise. Any miscalculation could be fatal. Despite the physical toll, Amanda remained relentless. She had become a master of stealth, timing her movements with the wind, using darkness and natural cover to her advantage. Sleep was rare, often limited to brief moments in caves or under overhanging cliffs. She rationed food and water meticulously, taking only what was necessary to maintain strength. Survival was not easy, but Amanda had proven before that endurance, intelligence, and discipline could overcome even the most impossible circumstances. Her mission expanded beyond self-preservation. Amanda began orchestrating small attacks to weaken the enemy's confidence, creating confusion and fear. Enemy soldiers reported disrupted supply lines, missing caches, and phantom attacks that left no trace. They began to question their own intelligence, their own safety, whispering of a supernatural adversary. Amanda smiled quietly in the shadows. She was not a ghost, only trained, resourceful, and relentless. By the seventh night, Amanda's intelligence gathering had allowed her to plan a precise strike. She knew the layout of the enemy encampment holding her team. Observing from a cliff above, she plotted routes, timing, and contingencies. The enemy was predictable, constrained by the terrain and their limited knowledge of the ranger in their midst. Amanda's patience and stealth gave her the upper hand. Her focus was unwavering. She moved like water through the canyon, unseen, unheard, untouchable. She disabled a communications array, misdirected patrols, and created the conditions for her team's eventual rescue. Every step was deliberate, every action intentional, and every breath measured. By operating as a ghost, Amanda had turned the Valley of Bones into her hunting ground, preparing for the moment she could strike decisively. Through observation, patience, and the discipline honed in Ranger School, Amanda realized she had become more than just a survivor. She was a force, unpredictable, precise, and unstoppable. The enemy underestimated her at their peril, and her team's fate now rested in her hands. The legend of the Spectre would soon become reality, and the soldiers who had doubted her would learn what it meant to survive against all odds. Amanda paused on a ridge, looking down at the small encampment below. Her body was battered, her wounds persistent, but her mind was razor-sharp. She whispered to herself, as she had many times before, "I survive. I strike. I win." In the darkness of the mountains, she was untouchable. She was the ghost. And soon, she would become the salvation her team desperately needed. By the time Amanda Hawk Reynolds reached the edge of the canyon overlooking the valley where her team was trapped, the sun had begun its slow ascent, painting jagged cliffs with streaks of gold and crimson. Her body ached, ribs bruised, muscles stiff, and the wound on her arm throbbing with every movement, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had spent days moving unseen, gathering intelligence, learning enemy patrol patterns and mapping escape routes. Survival was no longer the goal. The mission had expanded. Her team depended on her. From her vantage point, Amanda could see them. Her unit, huddled behind boulders, attempting to maintain a defensive perimeter against enemy patrols. Their weapons were limited, their morale strained, but their discipline remained. They believed she had fallen, that she was gone forever. Command had listed her as KIA, and yet she was alive, watching, planning, and preparing to strike. Every thought returned to the Ranger creed she had memorized as a young recruit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I will never quit. These words were no longer abstract. They were the code by which she lived. She would not abandon her team. Even wounded, outnumbered, and alone, she would act. Failure was not an option. Amanda began observing enemy patrols in detail. The insurgents were disciplined, but predictable, constrained by the terrain and their limited knowledge of the canyon. Some maintained lookout positions. Others guarded the path leading to her team's hiding place. Amanda noted rotations, timing, and weak points in their defense. Her training allowed her to calculate the optimal moment to move. Precision and patience would be her weapons. She scavenged nearby rocks and debris, fashioning crude distractions, small fires, displaced stones, and triggered branches to mislead enemy patrols and create diversions. Her movements were silent and deliberate. One misstep, one noise, could cost her the mission and her life. She had grown accustomed to moving as a shadow, a phantom in the canyon, undetectable to those hunting her. The physical toll was immense. Amanda's ribs throbbed with every breath. Her arm ached from a shallow fracture, and fatigue weighed heavily on her legs. Yet her mind remained resolute. Each challenge she overcame reinforced her determination. She recalled the training that had prepared her for this moment. Months in ranger school, crawling through mud, enduring sleep deprivation, navigating difficult terrain, and leading others under pressure. Every lesson now had immediate application. Amanda also calculated contingencies for her team. She considered alternate paths, emergency extraction points, and the likelihood of enemy reinforcements. Every detail mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. She visualized the mission as a series of chess moves, anticipating enemy reactions to her interventions. Strategy and stealth were intertwined. Success required both. Nightfall brought further challenges. Visibility dropped, temperatures fell, and the risk of exposure increased. Yet Amanda pressed forward, using shadows and natural cover to approach enemy positions. She moved silently, guided by the wind, her pulse steady, every sense alert. She was no longer just surviving. She was hunting, planning, and preparing for the decisive action that would save her team. During one reconnaissance, Amanda discovered a small, lightly guarded supply cache. She could have looted it for food, but she chose a more strategic action. Carefully, she sabotaged communications equipment and created diversions to mislead enemy patrols, forcing them to redistribute forces away from her team. Each calculated strike strengthened her advantage and demonstrated her mastery of stealth tactics. The closer she moved to her trapped comrades, the more dangerous the terrain became. Narrow ridges, sheer cliffs, and hidden crevasses threatened at every step. Amanda navigated each obstacle with the precision of a seasoned operative, testing footholds and balancing carefully. Pain was a constant companion, yet she ignored it. Her focus was absolute. The team's lives, their trust, and the mission's success outweighed any personal discomfort. By dawn of the third day, Amanda had mapped the enemy's final defensive positions. She identified weaknesses and opportunities, calculating the precise moment to act. She crafted a plan that relied on timing, deception, and her own skill, a solo strike to create chaos, disable the enemy, and clear a path for her team's extraction. The operation required flawless execution. Failure was not acceptable. Amanda's mind was calm, methodical, and strategic. She remembered the men who had doubted her during training, the instructors who had pushed her to her limits, and the colleagues who had questioned her capabilities. Now those doubts were irrelevant. She had become the embodiment of what Ranger training promised: precision, resilience, and unyielding will. She would not fail her comrades. The moment arrived. Amanda moved into position under the cover of darkness, blending seamlessly with shadows and terrain. Using careful, calculated movements, she eliminated isolated enemy guards, sabotaged their communication lines, and created controlled diversions that misled the enemy about the direction of her assault. The patrols were confused, disoriented, and vulnerable. Her team remained unaware of her presence, but she kept them in mind constantly. Every action she took was designed not just to survive, but to protect and rescue them. The bond of brotherhood and sisterhood, forged in combat, drove her forward. The mission had become personal, and she would succeed. Hours later, Amanda reached a vantage point directly above the enemy encampment holding her team. From this height, she could observe and plan the final assault. Her body was exhausted, every muscle aching, yet her mind was laser-focused. She had calculated every movement, timed every strike, and identified every escape route. The Rangers were trapped, but with precision and stealth, she could free them. She paused, taking a deep breath, steadying her pulse. Her voice whispered a silent promise. "I will not fail. I will bring you home." The words were more than motivation. They were her guiding principle. Every lesson from Ranger School, every survival exercise, every ounce of discipline she possessed coalesced into this moment. She was ready. Amanda descended from the ridge, moving like water through the shadows. Each step brought her closer to her team, each breath a study in control. Enemy soldiers were disoriented, reacting to diversions she had created. She struck swiftly, quietly neutralizing threats one by one, leaving confusion and chaos in her wake. Her presence was undetectable, a phantom among men unprepared for her skill. By first light, the path was clear. Amanda signaled silently to her team from concealed positions. Her teammates, eyes wide in disbelief, realized she had survived the fall and moved to save them. The impossible had become reality. Amanda Hawk Reynolds, battered but unbroken, had not only survived, but was about to reclaim the mission and rescue her comrades. The sun had barely broken over the jagged peaks when Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds moved into position. Her team, huddled behind rocks several hundred meters below, were visible through the early morning mist, weary, alert, and desperate. Their eyes scanned the horizon, still unaware that Amanda, presumed dead, was now their salvation. Every step she took was calculated, every movement deliberate. Failure was not an option. Amanda's body ached with the persistent throb of bruised ribs and the fracture in her arm, but her mind was razor-sharp. Years of training had prepared her for this precise moment. She surveyed the enemy positions. 5 heavily armed patrols moving in rotation around the perimeter, a guard tower with a sniper perched atop, and a secondary unit guarding supplies and communications. To confront them head-on would be suicide. But Amanda was no ordinary soldier. She was a ghost, a specter capable of striking from nowhere. Her plan relied on stealth and precision. First, she neutralized the guard tower. Using a long-range shot from her M4, she disabled the sniper quietly, hitting the scope and rendering the weapon useless. The guard slumped over, and the enemy below had no idea what had just occurred. Amanda's pulse remained steady, her focus unbroken. Timing was everything. Next, she created diversions along the ridges, using rocks and branches. Carefully placed, The sound of falling debris suggested movement from multiple directions. Enemy soldiers began to shift, reacting instinctively, leaving gaps in their coverage. Amanda took advantage of the chaos, slipping into a narrow canyon that led directly toward her trapped team. Her movements were fluid, ghost-like, every breath and step measured against the terrain. Reaching the edge of the encampment, Amanda scanned for her team. She spotted Private First Class Morales, who was slumped against a rock, bleeding from a shallow wound. She also saw Sergeant Jenkins, alert but exhausted, clutching his weapon tightly. Their eyes widened in disbelief when they recognized the shadow approaching from the mist, Amanda. She gave them a subtle nod, the silent signal that the impossible had arrived. She worked quickly, signaling the team to follow her lead. Each member moved with precision, trusting her instinct and judgment. Amanda guided them through the shadows, sticking to concealed paths and using natural cover to avoid enemy patrols. Every decision was critical. A single misstep could mean death. The mountains had tested her, but they had also taught her patience, timing, and adaptability. The enemy began to notice irregularities. Shouts echoed across the valley as guards discovered disabled equipment and patrols disrupted. Panic spread among the soldiers. Confusion became their greatest weakness. Amanda capitalized on it, neutralizing isolated threats quietly with tactical efficiency. Her team, inspired by her presence, regained confidence, following her silently through the rough terrain. At a choke point near a narrow ledge, Amanda encountered a small group of insurgents blocking the path. Her mind calculated options rapidly: engage directly, create a diversion, or bypass them. She chose a combination. Using rocks to create a controlled avalanche, she forced the enemy to scatter, then took out two with precision shots, while her team moved through. Chaos reigned below, and Amanda's ghost-like movements ensured that the enemy never realized the true source of the attack. Hours passed as Amanda guided her team through treacherous terrain. Each step required careful consideration. Loose rocks, sudden drops, and hidden crevices threatened every move. Yet she pressed forward, driven by the relentless will of a ranger. Her team, exhausted and injured, relied entirely on her knowledge and skill. Every time someone faltered, Amanda was there, supporting them silently, reinforcing both their bodies and their morale. As they approached the final stretch toward an extraction point, Amanda encountered the largest concentration of enemy forces yet, a fortified position guarding the narrow mountain pass. Direct engagement would be deadly, but Amanda's mind worked like a battlefield computer. She analyzed every weak point, every patrol rotation, and every line of sight. The pass could be bypassed or incapacitated strategically. She formulated a plan. Using darkness, shadows, and the natural terrain, Amanda approached undetected, neutralizing sentries one by one. Using hand signals, she guided her team silently along the hidden trail, bypassing the majority of the enemy. When unavoidable engagement arose, she struck decisively, a combination of suppressed shots, hand-to-hand precision, and tactical distractions. Every enemy incapacitated was swift, silent, and calculated. Finally, they reached the edge of the canyon, overlooking the extraction zone. Below, a helicopter was descending, the rotors stirring dust and small stones. The enemy had been partially cleared thanks to Amanda's interventions, but a few soldiers remained, attempting to regroup. Amanda's resolve hardened. She positioned herself on a high ledge, providing cover fire and distractions while her team boarded the helicopter. Each shot, each movement was precise, protecting her comrades from discovery and attack. Her team scrambled onto the helicopter, exhausted but alive. Sergeant Jenkins looked at her with a mixture of awe, relief, and disbelief. "Amanda, you made it," he whispered, shaking his head. Amanda offered a brief nod, her face streaked with dirt, blood, and sweat. Words were unnecessary. The mission had succeeded, but her task was not yet complete. Amanda noticed the remaining enemy soldiers attempting to flank the extraction point. With calculated precision, she drew their attention away using terrain and misdirection, giving the helicopter time to lift off safely. Every move was executed with the skill of someone who had survived impossible odds before. Every action reinforced why she was called Hawk. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, Amanda took one final glance at the mountains below, the Valley of Bones, a place that had tried to claim her life. She had moved through shadow, pain, and chaos to bring her team home. The impossible had been accomplished. Her team, now secure in the aircraft, watched in awe as the woman they had thought dead guided them through the deadliest terrain with unmatched precision. When the helicopter finally cleared the treacherous peaks and settled into a safer airspace, Amanda allowed herself a brief moment of relief. Every wound, every ache, every pain was worth it. She had saved lives, upheld the Ranger creed, and defied the odds. The mountains had tried to defeat her, the enemy had tried to end her, and yet she had prevailed. As they flew toward safety, her team rallied around her, voices filled with gratitude, awe, and newfound respect. Amanda remained silent, as always. Words were secondary to action. She had survived the fall, outwitted the enemy, and ensured that no comrade was left behind. She was more than a soldier. She was a legend in the making. The helicopter touched down on the base perimeter, just as the sun began its climb over the rugged peaks. Dust swirled around the aircraft, mixing with the scent of spent fuel and rain-soaked earth. Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds stepped off last, every movement deliberate, despite the exhaustion coursing through her body. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with blood and mud, and her arm wrapped in a crude sling, but she stood tall, unwavering. She had survived the fall, the mountains, and the enemy. The team she had rescued followed, their eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. They had watched her presumed death, mourned her loss, and now witnessed her return, not broken, not defeated, but triumphant. Sergeant Jenkins, still gripping his weapon, shook his head, almost unable to believe what he saw. We thought you were gone," he said quietly. Amanda's expression softened only slightly. Words were unnecessary. Her presence, her survival, and her leadership spoke louder than any phrase could. Amanda was quickly ushered to the medical bay. Medics assessed her injuries: fractured ribs, deep lacerations on her arms and legs, severe bruising, and mild hypothermia. Yet despite the trauma, she remained composed, answering questions calmly and providing detailed accounts of her actions. She spoke with precision, recalling enemy positions, patrol patterns, and the exact sequence of her team's rescue. Her clarity under stress, even while physically broken, left the medical team and commanding officers astonished. Later, in the debriefing room, Amanda recounted the events of the past week with meticulous detail. The helicopter sabotage, the fall, her days alone in the Valley of Bones, the enemy patrols, and finally the rescue operation. Every moment was described with tactical precision. Her commanders listened, eyes widening at her ingenuity and resilience. "You survived what we didn't think possible," one said. "And you saved your team. Not just a few, but everyone. That's beyond exceptional." Amanda's mind returned to Ranger School memories. Long nights in mud, relentless exercises, and lessons in discipline, leadership, and survival. Every obstacle had been a preparation for this exact scenario. Each bruise and blister had been a lesson in patience and endurance. A fall from the helicopter, the isolation, the enemy ambushes, they were extreme tests. Yet she had relied on the training that had shaped her into a soldier capable of defying death. Recognition was inevitable. The story of her survival spread quickly through the ranks. Fellow rangers, soldiers, and even civilians began referring to her as a legend. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, assess danger, and execute flawless tactical maneuvers against overwhelming odds became a case study in leadership and resilience. Yet Amanda remained grounded. She refused accolades for herself, insisting that every action was about the team, the mission, and the principles she had sworn to uphold. In the quiet of the evening, Amanda stood alone on the base perimeter, looking toward the mountains that had tested her so thoroughly. The Valley of Bones, once a place of near death and isolation, now seemed almost serene from a distance. She traced the path she had taken mentally, the cliffs, the ravines, the hidden caves, and reflected on the lessons she had learned. Survival was never about strength alone. It was about discipline, focus, observation, and adaptability. And most importantly, it was about never leaving a comrade behind. Amanda's recovery was slow but steady. Medics monitored her injuries, ensuring that the ribs healed properly and that infection did not take hold. Physical therapy began, but her mental resilience had already recovered. She trained quietly, reinforcing muscle memory, tactical drills, and marksmanship. Her team, inspired by her example, began to mirror her discipline and focus. She was not just a survivor. She was a mentor, a leader, and a living testament to the ideals of the Rangers. Command recognized Amanda's actions formally. She was awarded commendations for valor, leadership, and ingenuity under fire. But her greatest reward was the respect of her peers and the knowledge that she had fulfilled the most sacred code of a Ranger. No one is left behind. She had survived the impossible, saved her team, and returned stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. In the months that followed, Amanda became a symbol of resilience and courage. She spoke at training exercises, sharing her experiences, and emphasizing the importance of preparation, mental fortitude, and tactical awareness. Recruits listened in rapt attention, absorbing her lessons not just as training, but as life-saving strategies. Her story inspired countless others to embrace the principles that had allowed her to survive when all odds were against her. Yet Amanda remained humble. She never claimed heroism for herself. Instead, she focused on the team she had rescued, the instructors who had tested her limits, and the mountains that had forged her into something greater. She understood that survival was a combination of preparation, instinct, and willpower, a lesson she hoped every soldier could carry forward. One quiet evening, she returned to the place where the helicopter had gone down, now distant and peaceful from the safety of the base. The wreckage had been cleared, but the memory remained vivid. She closed her eyes and remembered the fall, the pain, the isolation, and the relentless determination that had driven her. A small, private smile crossed her face. She had faced death, survived against impossible odds, and risen stronger. Amanda Hawk Reynolds had become more than a soldier. She was a legend, a ghost who had walked among the shadows and returned to light. She had redefined what it meant to endure, to lead, and to survive. The mountains, the enemy, and the fall had tested her, but they had not broken her. She had embraced the impossible, and in doing so, she had inspired all who would follow. The story of the Ranger who fell from the sky, survived alone, and returned to save her team would be told for generations. In training halls, barracks, and battlefields, her courage would echo. And every time a recruit heard the tale, they would understand one simple truth. A Ranger's will is unbreakable, and a true Ranger never leaves a comrade behind. As night settled over the base, Amanda looked at the stars, reflecting on her journey. Pain, fear, and isolation had tested every fiber of her being. Yet she had endured. She had acted with courage, precision, and unwavering determination. She had risen from the fall, and she knew, no matter the challenge, no matter the enemy, she would face it with the same relentless spirit that had carried her through the Valley of Bones. The mountains could try to claim her. The storms could batter her. The enemy could strike at her. But Amanda Hawk Reynolds would survive, rise, and protect those who could not protect themselves. She was a ranger. She was unstoppable. And her story, one of courage, resilience, and unwavering determination, would live forever.